So I've been a professor at the University of Georgia for 30 years, and I'm definitely not a typical professor there, I can tell you. I was saved when I got there, fortunately. But yeah, it's been a very interesting time. There are a lot of believers still there, but it's a secular university, I can tell you. But you know, it's just reflective of the country in a lot of ways. I won't talk a lot about that. The Lord has blessed me there. I've seen a lot of people come to the Lord there, and I mean a lot. And I've seen a lot of young Christian men and women go in the ditch there. Okay, I've seen that as well, and that's been very common. But what I'm going to talk to you tonight is not about the university. What I do there? Yeah, who am I? I'm a professor in emergency management. Okay, so I'm kind of the Homeland Security guy at the university. I'm a director of the Institute for Disaster Management. And they gave me a fancy new building over there, and we do all the hospital exercises for the state, all the emergency exercises. And I'll be talking a little bit about that. But what happens when there's a large number of people show up at a hospital? You know, they can barely handle it now. Half the hospitals in the state lost money last year. I don't know, y'all don't look like the sort of folks that like Obama much, but Obamacare has almost destroyed the healthcare system. It's just about to bring it down. But the hospitals were struggling anyway. Well, what we do is we go out there, and what happens if 50 people show up? We had a big bombing attack exercise, simulating what the Muslims are doing over there in Europe and shooting people down there in Florida. We're getting ready for it. So that's what I do. My guys go all over the state, we show the ambulances how to handle Ebola patients and stuff like that. So it's all very dramatic stuff. And it's coming. But, you know, it's obvious to any observer, okay, that America is sliding downhill. So I'm not going to rail at the darkness tonight, okay? But, you know, by an economic measurement, educational, you know, the education's sliding. We're throwing money at education, and ooh, it's going downhill. Military, we might be making a little bit of a turnaround now, I don't know. My son's a Marine, okay, and I'm very proud of him, and he served in Iraq and Afghanistan. My daughter is marrying a Marine, godly young man from my church, here in another week. But the military has taken a real turn down, and the moral decline, but especially there's been a spiritual decline. And that's the most important one, okay? That's the most important one, the spiritual decline. If you want to see judgment, that's the one to watch. Not the economy, not the military. It is the church. So judgment, you don't hear much about judgment. I like to amuse myself, Pastor. I'll go into a Christian bookstore and I'll say, hi, and they're you perky, they come up, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I need a book on judgment. Not once have I been handed a book on judgment in a Christian bookstore. And anyway, I shouldn't do that. But so it's not something that is typically talked about much, okay? I don't doubt that your pastor and the Crawford pastor, I don't doubt for a minute they talk about judgment from time to time, but in a typical church it's not talked about much. But judgment happens, and the Word of God says a lot about it, okay? You know, like Jesus talked a lot more about hell than he did about heaven. Well, there's a lot in there about judgment, okay? A lot. And so if you think judgment is coming, it might not be a bad idea to look into it. Because the Bible is a great, I'm an educator, I can't help it. And so the Bible is a great educator book about judgment. Okay, so now that's what I do for a living. I study breakdown in healthcare, breakdown law and order. You know, what are we going to do about those kind of things? When do we pull out the troops, and how do you, you know, you'd be very surprised what kind of laws are already in place, okay? How fast your liberties will evaporate when things start to go downhill. or as I've heard some of our leaders say, we don't want to let a good emergency go to waste, okay? And so, you know, we're going downhill fast here. But, and that's what I do for a living, but really, what everybody wants to talk about when you hear about judgment is when. Well, when's it going to happen? Well, I don't know. You know, I really don't. But and so I'm not even going to talk about that. When? I got some ideas about it, but really, the why and the how. Now that I can talk about. So if y'all ask me when, if y'all want, we can have little questions at the end. That'd be great. But I don't know the when. Now the other thing is, I'm no expert on the end times. Okay, you want to know about the end times? You got two really good pastors in here. I strongly encourage you to go to them. Okay, I'm kind of an associate pastor in my church, but I'm not an expert on the end times. So you got to separate that out. There's no doubt that Revelation is true, and there's a lot of emphasis on it. But I'll leave that to other men to preach about. It does appear, you know, we're heading that way. I can do that. And then also, I notice it doesn't look to me like America's in the book of Revelation. I can't find it. I hear some other people trying to shoehorn it in there, but so if it's not in Revelation, what does that mean? I mean, we're gone by the time it gets there. I don't know. That's all you're going to get about the end times out of me. Because this message, one similar to it that I've given before, is not about the end times. It's not about the Great Tribulation, but it's about tribulation that comes to Christians all throughout history. All throughout history, Christians have gone through little tribulation. Okay, and that almost certainly is what's coming. Okay, we're going to see one of those kinds of tribulations. Not maybe the Great Tribulation, could be, but before we get there, we will likely go through little tribulations. Okay, because God judges nations. It's as clear as it can be. And you know, I have this friend of mine. He called me today. He's a Jewish psychiatrist from Harvard, and I love the man. And he knows this is coming too, but he doesn't know the solution necessarily. And it's coming. And a lot of the secular people, like my buddy from Harvard, who calls me and always gives me a hard time about Jesus, but he's a great guy. But they can see it too. So it's a lot of people. It's not just a spiritual thing, but there's a denial. The reason I mention him, he's into writing papers about mass denial. Why do people not want to face things? We've got a $20 trillion deficit. That's going to bring us down. You know, we need more government programs. It's mass denial, and it's something the secular community, the university people, they know all about it. Talk about it all the time. You never hear it on the TV, you know, on television. But mass denial, I don't want to face it. Okay? That's what's going on here, is people don't want to face judgment. And however, God is very consistent in patterns of judgment. If you look in the Old Testament, full of it. There's full of historical, and it gives you kind of guidelines. Most of us, you know, you get into a new job. All right, what's the rules? You know, what do I have to do on this job? And they'll give it to you, you know. And, well, there's guidelines for judgment, okay? And one of the best ones is in the book of Ezekiel. So I invite you to go to the book of Ezekiel. And maybe you start off in chapter 7. I spent, as I was telling the pastor earlier, I spent about 20 years ago, the Lord led me to that judgment was coming. And I spent years in Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Isaiah. Books on judgment. On a country that was under judgment. I have a mural on my wall at my home, a big giant mural of the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, why would I do that? I love the Jews. I'm going to Israel again in January. It's part of my work. And the Jews know more about bombing attacks and trauma than anybody, because the Muslims are already, they're already blowing them up. There's a lot of examples here. So let's go to Isaiah 7, verse 8. Okay? And because the reason I like to go through here is because it talks about God judging His own people. Judgment starts in the house of God. Okay? Now the consequences of action of our fellow Americans out here that are doing all sorts of crazy things, there's consequences to sin. Okay? But judgment starts in the house of God. Okay? So let's read Ezekiel 7:8. Now this Ezekiel is the prophet that is preaching to people that are under judgment at that time. The hammer of judgment had come down on them. And Ezekiel was there. Okay? And the country was being wiped out. So what does God say to them? His people. Ezekiel 7:8. Now upon you I will soon pour out my fury and spend my anger upon you. I will judge you according to your ways, and I will repay you for all your abominations. I won't go into it now, but a very interesting study is, what does God consider an abomination? Okay? You ought to look at that. He has very set things. Did you know that a haughty look is one of them? That's an abomination to God. Okay? So that's God talking. Well, I'm a science guy. Okay, I like numbers, and so what does this judgment look like? Because what I have to do in my work is, okay, if we have a bunch of pestilence, how are we going to take care of that? If we're going to have a bunch of bombing victims, for instance, in this exercise I did back a few months ago in Atlanta, we had 24 hospitals working together. What would happen if we had something like the shooting that occurred down in the gay bar down there in Florida, and the bombings that the Muslims did? It was Muslims did both of these in Paris, France. We simulated that because that could happen here. It could easily happen here. And so, what's the technology here? All right. Well, let's look down a few verses. Ezekiel 7:15 is a great technology of judgment verse. Okay? Ezekiel 7:15. The sword is outside, and pestilence and famine are within. Whoever is in the field will die by the sword, and whoever is in the city, famine and pestilence will devour him. This is a very common pattern that we see, is that people in cities tend to, the famine and pestilence is the main thing that happens in the big city. Us folks out here in the country, we can grow food if we really have to. You know, it doesn't grow down in Kroger. Some of the youngsters think that. But so that's what happens, is in the rural areas, famine and pestilence isn't as common. People aren't all crammed in together. You can kind of take care of yourself. But the problem is the sword. Okay, these gangs or whatever it is will be roaming around. Throughout history, that's the pattern. Okay, and the Word of God reflects this. And now, of course, sword was the violence of the weapons at the time. And one thing you can be sure of, gun laws are not going to stop violence from occurring in this country. I'll just have to throw that one out there. Did you know that as of on Monday, Pastor, I can take a gun to the University of Georgia? They finally passed a law. We have open carry at the University of Georgia. And, yeah, there you go. So yeah, that's different. We finally, anyway, I won't go any further on that. But so famine and pestilence. Let's talk about that. Famine and pestilence are very common in the Bible, and they're very common in the world today. My son, who wasn't able to come with me tonight, he just got back from Nepal, and oh my, missions trip to Nepal. And you talk about famine and pestilence, you're seeing that there. But they are instruments of God's judgment. He uses it. famine and pestilence. Now, I'll tell you what, if you don't believe pestilence can come to America, we're so clean here, we're just, man, whatever. I'll tell you what my people were doing this week. They were going around, and they were out in Rome yesterday, and they were, I can't remember, and they were moving around. And we're showing the ambulances how to put in these kind of balloon things that you can put infected patients in them now. Because now we can't let our ambulance guys, people are quitting these guys. They don't want to do it. Okay? So we're trying to get them to stay, and we're having these little balloon things, and you stick the patient in there, and you have these little arms, it's like Hollywood, you know. And our guys are going around showing the ambulances how to do that. Now, if pestilence is coming here, why are we doing that? Okay, we have a warehouse about as big as this thing. We had filled with equipment that the government bought, but nobody knows how to use this stuff. My people were going out. I'm telling you, pestilence is coming down here because we're getting the ambulances ready for it. Okay, and that's my evidence. Okay, I'm a big evidence. What's the evidence? And I'll tell you, I've gone and seen this. I went to Sudan a couple of years ago, and some public health people, and they'd had a civil war there for 20 years. The Muslims in the north, in what is now called Sudan, and South Sudan is now broken off from them. In the north, Sudan, you have these Arabic Muslims, so they're, I guess we'll just say they're white Arabic Muslims. And in the south, you've got these black folks. Okay, so white in the north and black in the south, and very few of them are Muslims. A few of them are Christians. Most of them are pagan. And the Muslims from the north just went down there. They killed about 2 million of them. 2 million. You hardly ever heard about that. White people killing black people. You know, usually that would make the news, right? Well, they killed 2 million of them, but they're Muslims, so you don't hear too much about it. Well, they finally pushed them out. They fought them. Those guys, the black guys that were fighting the Muslims, they were wiry little guys, man. And they were fighting them from in the bush. We were giving them weapons, and they finally fought them. But famine, you want to see famine? I saw famine and pestilence in action. I just got to tell you, there was this little black pastor I talked to, and what it is, the pastors had never gotten together, because you got all the pastors in one spot. The Muslims would come and, you know, they'd do a helicopter thing on it and blow them up. Well, so they had never gotten together, and so we had a conference with them, and I talked to this one black pastor, and he had a big, I don't know how to describe it, a hole in his head. And it barely had kind of healed over a little bit. So they brought him to me, because that's kind of the stuff I do. And his class, the Muslims had come into his village, and he was not only the pastor on Sunday, he was the teacher during the week. And so they had gathered the kids together, the Muslims had, and they said, kill your teacher, your pastor. This is the way they do it. This is the way they operate. And a couple of the thugs, you know, every little group has some thugs in it, you know, and they did it. They just took a big pipe and just beat him, and he lived. His head's all dented in, and he now has church, and we had that service in the burned out building that they had burned out, and now they're meeting in that burned out building. Holy moly. Oh man. Woo! And but that is what happens to a lot of God's people. Now that could come here. I think it could come in here. I saw it in South Sudan. But what I also saw was the famine and the pestilence. It moves through a community when you have all this kind of warfare. God's judgment, I'm telling you, that is what you see. And it's a very unpleasant thing to watch. So that's the how of judgment. Sword, famine, pestilence. All right? Let's go over to Ezekiel 16 now. All right? Just for the ease of things, Ezekiel 16. And 16:47, Ezekiel 16, verses 47. So, you want to see some guidelines about judgment, this is a good place to go. Ezekiel 16:47. And the thing that God hates is that when a country is blessed by Him and then rebels. Okay? And especially when they rebel even more than the heathen do. Okay? Now, you know, I work with a bunch of unbelievers at the university, and I tell you the truth, I actually get along fairly well with most of them, you know. That's what they do, you know. Ones I have more trouble with are some of the Christians, you know, who are in compromise, who are in real compromise, okay. So when you go, when a country and people blessed by God, and they go way over there, worse than the heathen, then that's when you can be sure that judgment is about to fall. Okay, does that sound familiar to you? Okay. Ezekiel 16:47. You did not, now this is talking to God's people, you did not walk in their ways, nor act according to their abominations. Talking about like the real heathen. But as if that were too little, you became more corrupt than they in all your ways. As I live, oh man, I see this judgment coming on America. Says the Lord God, neither your sister Sodom nor her daughters have done as you and your daughters have done. Look, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. Now you're probably thinking, oh no, he's going to talk about all that nasty stuff. No, look what God says was the worst thing about Sodom. Verse 49. She and her daughter had pride, fullness of food, and abundance of idleness. And a lot of people are a little shocked that those are the ones that God picks out. You thought I was going to start talking about all this sodomite stuff. And neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. Here it comes. And they were haughty and committed abominations before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw fit. And he goes on. Verse 51. Samaria did not commit half of your sins, but you have multiplied your abominations more than they, and have justified your sisters, in other words, the real heathens, by all the abominations which you have done. You who judge your sisters bear your own shame also, because the sins which you committed were more abominable than theirs. They are more righteous than you. Yes, be disgraced also and bear your own shame because you justified your sisters. Is that America today? You decide. Okay, I'll leave that for you to think about. But what I'm presenting as a pastor, as a science guy, I like to go to the documentations. What were the guidelines? What are the guidelines here? This is the guidelines. And that is when the hammer falls. Okay? When you actually go worse than the Sodom people. You go worse than the people that you were kind of pointing your finger at. And I think it is my view that that's where we're headed now. We're actually worse off than many nations that don't know God at all. Okay? I think that could be very well supported. For instance, I'll give you an example. Okay? A lot of the attacks that we prepare for are now from Muslim attacks, because they like to shoot people up and blow things up. But you know why the Arabs hate us so badly? I don't know if any of you ever talk to them. I talk to them all the time. Why do you hate America? It is because you lead our children, I shouldn't be making fun of their accents, but it's because you lead our children away from the right way. How do we do that? Abortion. You introduced abortion into our countries. If you were me at that point, they got me. They didn't bring abortion in. We did. We brought it to them. And then they say, rebellious women, our wives used to be very respectful. And now you have taught our wives to be rebellious. Of course, what's going through my head is, man, you know, you beat them up and you treat them like trash. So I think you might want to go look in the mirror, buddy. But there is some truth to this. That we have brought that rebellious attitude, you know, like you see in a Hollywood movie. Yeah. And then drugs. We brought drugs in there and we popularized it. And so, now this is, you know, like I said, there's a lot of self-justification going on here. Okay. These guys, most of them don't treat their women very well. But they see America as having introduced these things to their country, and they see us as less righteous than them. I guess that's the important thing, is they see us as less righteous than they are. And so what does God see? Well, that would be the thing you'd want to look at. Do you know that Russia has a lot of problems? Okay, I spent 10 years at Chernobyl, you know, where they blew up that nuclear reactor and sent radiation everywhere. And I spent 10 years over there. I was able to share the gospel with a lot of folks. But I also learned a lot about the Russians. So alcoholism is very bad there. And there are a lot of orphans for a lot of reasons. Okay? Life in Russia is hard, and then you die. That's a phrase that they say in Russia. Okay? So they have a lot of orphans. Well, Americans, you know, it's hard to get a white baby now, okay, because most of them are aborted. So people that want to adopt a little white baby, they usually go over to Eastern Europe and they get one Russian or Romanian or something. You know, the Russians will not let Americans adopt babies anymore. Why is that? Because we have gay marriage. That was it. That's when they cut it off. So here we are. You know, we look at the Russians. They've been our enemies all these years. You know, and they had killed 70 million of their own citizens. And it is true that they just killed millions of Christians. And so they got a lot of bad stuff going on. But they see themselves as more righteous than America. Because they don't allow gay marriage. I'm sure that sort of thing goes on there. But not sanctioned by the state. Are you starting to formulate here? Are we starting to get an idea that we're moving toward the very guidelines that God has set? When the heathen, when the unbelievers, when the people outside of Christ see us as worse than them. And they got some points. They got a point. Okay? That's when you got the idea that the fulcrum has changed. Okay? That is when you better start worrying. Now the swords. The other thing that's really bad today is the swords were inefficient in the old days. Okay? In the old days, you're fighting it out, and you can kind of run off and hide, and you really couldn't kill very efficiently. That is not the case today. Okay, we got machine guns, we got helicopter gunships, we have satellites. You can't hide anywhere now. In the old days, you used to be able to go out in the woods and, you know, come and get me, boy. You know, well, that's a little harder to do now. It's a lot harder to do. Okay, they got satellite imagery. I tell you what, my son, Marine captain, and he said that was his job, was hunting down Taliban. Okay, and he says, "Oh, Dad, I can hunt them down. I can find them. They think they're hiding somewhere, and we'd find them, and we'd flush them out." And I said, "So that's kind of the way it is now, right, son?" "Yeah, there's no place to hide now, Dad. If you've got people really determined to find you." And I was like, that was, you know, a magic moment for me. I mean, I wasn't sad for the Taliban. He used to call them torching Toyotas, and they'd be a Toyota of them filled. They'd blow them up. But that technology now exists. So it's a lot easier to find and kill people. Not just kill them, but find them. Okay? And it's also much harder to hide than in the old days. Okay? And then there is chemical weapons and biological weapons and nuclear weapons. That's my expertise. I'm not going to go into a lot of it tonight. That's what I do a lot of for the government. I've testified before Congress on this stuff. And there's all sorts of weird weapons out there now. Really strange stuff that is on the edge. You've probably seen the news, them using chemical weapons over there in Syria. The government there and the little kids. You probably saw some of the images of the little kids. You know, very, very moving. But that's a very inefficient. Because that government can't use the weapons like they really want to. You haven't seen even a fraction of what's possible with these weapons now. So there's all sorts of new swords. Yeah. So when judgment falls, judgment is going to be some of the judgment will be the same. Pestilence, for instance. The plague, for instance. The plague. Y'all ever seen that little song the kids play sometimes? Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posy. Ring around the rosy was where the flea bit them, and there was a ring around the rosy, which is where the flea bite was, where they got the Yersinia pestis disease. Pocket full of posy. That is where they thought they were protecting themselves with flower petals. So the kids would stick flower petals in their pockets. Ashes. Have you ever seen the Catholics on ashes? Wednesday they put ashes on their head? When somebody died, they were putting ashes on their head. We all fall down. We all die. So that's a plague song from 700 years ago. And our children, have y'all ever seen that? Or the kids sing that little song? That's a plague song from 700 years ago. And sometimes I say, don't let me. Jesus loves me or something. I'm happy. Of course the kids don't. It's been around a long time. Well, the plague's been around a long time. So some of these pestilences will be very similar to the pestilences that came before. And some of them will be new. Okay? I'll give you an example. There are clubs now called genetics clubs or gene splicing clubs. And I have friends of mine that are very nervous about it. So these are little science geek kids, you know. And it used to take a big pharmaceutical company millions of dollars and all these PhDs and, you know, they're making these little gene. Now these kids do it. They order this stuff on the internet and little primers come in and then, you know, Ahmed, he talks to Juan down in Ahmed in Syria talks to Juan in South America, who talks to Hojo in Japan, and oh, you know, no, you got to do it this way, and next thing you know, they've invented a new life form, and they've injected it into fleas, and the fleas are biting, and it's spreading the disease, and nobody knows about this because these little genetics clubs, kids. You know, I'm telling you, it's about to. Yeah, one of my favorite phrases, some pastor friends of mine is, when that guy dies, he's going to bust hell wide open. Well, hell's is about to bust wide open. And it's going to be weird stuff like this. Stuff we have never even seen before. Stuff we don't even know about. Okay? It's about to bust wide open. And that's why, if you ask me the when, I don't know. You know, quite frankly, I'm surprised it hadn't happened already. Well, we might stumble along. The sun is shining out there, and you know everything's going to go on. Stock market's going to go, but it can't keep going. And this is some of the reasons why. Because this stuff is happening now. You see how fast technology is changing? This has taken over. This has taken over, and it's not all good. You know the average in an average church in America, way over half of the kids are looking at porn on these things. I won't tell you the number. It's a shocking number. It's way over half. And I'm talking about the church kids. Okay? Technology has completely changed things, and that's why, the only reason I mention it is not to rail at the darkness, but to say that time's kind of running out, okay? Just because of these technology changes, okay? It's kind of accelerated. Let's go back to Ezekiel, chapter 5, verse 12. Just to give you an idea that nothing is new under the sun. So Ezekiel 5, chapter. I just love numbers. I'm sorry, I'm a numbers guy. You know, give me some numbers, will you? 1/3 of you. This is real pleasant stuff. 1/3 of you shall die of the pestilence and be consumed with famine in your midst. 1/3 shall fall by the sword all around you. And I will scatter another 1/3 to all the winds, and I will draw out a sword after them. That's kind of what I saw in Sudan. There's something. Okay, in some areas. There was a lot of folks dying of the sword. Pretty much the ones out. Because the ones that were in the city, they were already conquered. So they wouldn't kill them. They died of disease, okay, or starvation. And so, I'll give you a few numbers there. I won't even tell you about the nuclear stuff. Nuclear weapons will be used in the next 10 years. That's just, we're getting ready for it. Now, I was talking, we were talking beforehand. I've lived in Madison County over here for the last 22 years. So I didn't grow up here, but I moved here. Why? Because this is a great place to live. Y'all are in a pretty good spot out here, all right? You let those folks inside the 285 loop who make twice what you make or 3 times what you make, you let them laugh. They won't be laughing much longer, okay? Because the big cities, and I have nothing against it. I have a lot of good friends, good Christian friends in Atlanta. But the big cities are in trouble, okay, and they know it, okay. I'll just leave it at that. I've been talking to the guys in Atlanta, and things are not going to do well in the cities, okay. And one of the reasons is because nuclear weapons are going to be used on them, okay. They're not going to knock a bomb off in Arnoldsville, They're going to go for Atlanta, and Atlanta's a big target. New York, Washington. I've done simulations for all the major targets. And Houston, my hometown, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Atlanta, Philadelphia. There's your targets. Those are cities that are going to get it. And then, of course, but you know what? You know what will affect us out here in the country? It's mainly going to be a breakdown in transportation. Okay? You know this Kroger over here and this Ingles over here? You know what the average one of these kind of stores has 12 shipments a day coming in there? That's why there's 1 billion boxes out in back of these places. They're constantly, why is it in an ice storm that the shelves vanish like that? It's because they vanish like that all the time, okay? But they're having to be restocked. If transportation breaks down, there are no stores, okay? The stores will empty out fast, okay? It's because we're very modern, but we're very dependent on that modern, okay? The big thing we're looking at now is cyber attacks. Have you been watching the news last couple of days? Ransomware, where they take a company down and they gotta pay a ransom. That is huge. Okay, huge. The computers, the kids I'm training now, they all look like kids to me now. The kids I'm training now, we're training them how to operate with no electricity and with no internet and with limited vehicles. That's how we're training them, because that's where they're going to be operating. Okay, we're going to be lying to them if we think. I just tell them, you guys, just put those in a box over here for now, and we're going to now do our training without them. I'll do it with them too, of course, because that's where we're headed, and that's where training in my field is going to now. No electricity, or at least interruption of electricity. Where it goes off. like it does in other countries. We're a third world country now. They even figured it out. We're going to have brownouts. That's like they do. We're going to have diseases going through the thing, going through our culture. And, breakdown in law and order. Now, I won't read Ezekiel 18:30-32, but it talks about repentance. Okay? It talks about repentance. An about face. It's a military command. How do you stop this from happening? There's only one way, and that is repentance. Hell's best kept secret. Okay? That you can have salvation without repentance. That you can buy God off with your actions. There's only one thing that has ever stopped judgment or turned it around after it has occurred, is God's mercy. What does he demand? About face. Okay? My son's like a Marine. My daughter's marrying one. They know all about face. Okay? Well, we need to know about face, and it's a heart about face. The actions they mean something, but they only are reflective of the heart. Okay? Let me conclude with this. Let's go. I got to be in the New Testament. All this depressing Old Testament stuff. Matthew chapter 5. I'll just tell y'all, whenever my friends, whenever we play Bible trivia or something, I'm the Old Testament guy. I just love the Old Testament. You have to get somebody else, get the pastor to do the New Testament, you know. But yeah, I'm going to have it. Matthew 5:13. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. What is the context here? In those days, salt was used to flavor foods. It was even used as money. But it would get mixed in because you used it over and over again. But you can't just throw it out in the dump, because if you're a farmer, the salt will ruin the soil. So they used to throw it in the road. Okay? And all the dirt salt, the salt that had used up, kind of like cooking oil we think of today. You know, cooking oil gets, you cook your bacon and then you got to throw that grease out. Well, you throw it in the road. If you throw it down the sink, it's going to clog the drain like I did the other day. But you take the salt that has become, and when it's no longer good for flavoring your food, you throw it in the road, because nobody's going to grow food in the road. And then the Roman soldiers or whoever it is come on and they tramp it down. Well, that is what God thinks of the saltless former followers of him. If your salt has become tasteless, then it's, or as my grandma used to say, it's good for nothing. You ain't good for nothing. When somebody didn't take the trash out. It's good for nothing but to be trampled underfoot by men. And that's salt in the middle of the road. That's talking about us. Okay? If our salt has become tasteless, then we ain't good for nothing but to be trampled underfoot by men. And let me give you some examples, and I'll end with this. There are many examples of Christian societies that have become, salt has become tasteless, and what happened to them? They were trampled underfoot. The Russian Christians, Russia. If you ask somebody in 1917, you walk down the road in Russia, are you Christian? Oh yes, I pray. You know, and if you look down the road, 90%. More than 90% of the people you would run into in 1917 Russia would have said, yes, I'm a Christian. God really loves me, man. I'm with God. And yet the communists took over the country with less than 1% of the population. They had less than 1%. And they took over. How did they do that? And as a matter of fact, they killed millions and millions of these people that call themselves Christians. how did that happen? I'll tell you how it happened. The salt became tasteless. The church was corrupt, and it was trampled underfoot. And the communists took over the country. They murdered millions of Christians, or people that called themselves Christians. That is God's judgment. There are many examples like that. I've written on it. And I told you about Sudan. Okay, I asked that pastor with his head beaten in. And says, "Pastor, why did God allow this to happen to you?" He says, he didn't say salt became tasteless. He said something much harsher than that. He said the biggest problem in his congregation had been drunkenness. Okay. And he says, it was God's judgment. And I was like, oh, man. When he'd get real excited, his head would kind of, the skin would start, you know. And I said, wow, that's something. God's judgment. That was a Christian group he was talking about. Now, is it all bad? I want to end on a happy note. You could depress, you could depress the bride at a wedding, with your stuff. And well, let's talk a happy note. All this persecution I'm talking about, is it all bad? Well, let's look at China. I have a wonderful opportunity to witness to Chinese now. They came to me. I'm going to have 20 of them over to my home. Okay, they're going to come from China. I'm going to have a big dinner at my house for them, and I've already witnessed to them once. And so what's going on in China? And these are not Christians. China had missionaries there for about 100 years, from the mid-1800s to mid-1900s. And there were about 1 million Christians in 1949 when the communists took over. Okay? The communists took over China. And there's a lot of things went on there. Quite frankly, there are a lot of people in our government that helped that happen. But all that aside, so the communists took over China. Oh, that's terrible. Wow, they were determined. Mao Zedong killed over 100 million people in China. That's a lot of folks. That's filling the body bags, okay? 100 million. And so, of course, who is he going to include in that 100 million? The 1 million Christians. He said, make sure you get them. And so they went after them. No holds barred. Bayonet them, kill them, do whatever you have to do, wipe them out. What has happened after 70 years of this persecution in China? 1 million Christians has become 100 million Christians. That's, as a matter of fact, it's probably 150 million. But let's not exaggerate, okay? And let's just say it's 100 million. Because it's great, because it talks about that verse that says, you'll see fruit 30-fold or 100-fold. Wouldn't you want to see 100-fold fruit? Well, they saw it in China. So they went from 1 million in 1949 to over 100 million today. Now, I will tell you that they're all at the bottom of that society. You can't get a decent job. You can't really get anything. You're going to be at the bottom, socioeconomically. But you're at the top in God's sight. So what I'm saying is, God's judgment has many sides to it. There is the pestilence and the sword and the famine, and that ain't pretty at all. But what has happened in America during this time of plenty? During my lifetime, America has become the mightiest nation in the world, the richest nation in the world, if you don't count the dead. If you count in profit and loss, it doesn't look so good. But, our government doesn't care about that. So we're sort of the richest country in the world. But what has happened spiritually to us? Obvious. You already know the answer. What happened in China? The exact opposite. Matter of fact, China and America are opposites. Back during the middle of the Obama administration, we were borrowing $1 trillion a year, and China was making $1 trillion a year. So we were going $1 trillion a year in the hole every year, and they were making $1 trillion a year. But you know what? That's one big difference between China and America, is they were making money and we were losing it. But in America, the number of believers was declining. And what was the number of Americans doing in China? Increasing. So you see, God's judgment, it's not really what a lot of people expect. So it may very well be, I firmly believe, I think I've made a pretty good case here. That's what academics do. We try to make a case, and are you convinced that I'm right? You know, I think I've made a pretty good case that judgment is coming here, but it may not turn out exactly the way that you think, because certainly in China and in Sudan, okay, and Indonesia, all these places where there's severe persecution, the church is growing. That makes sense, does it? And here in America, where we got, you know, more dollars than cents, as they would say, we got more borrowed dollars than cents. Anyway, the church is declining. So I guess I'll close with that even though it's not going to look good in a lot of ways, my hope, and I know I've talked to a lot of pastors, and a lot of them, I'm not saying that the pastors that are here tonight have said this to me, but a lot of other pastors have said to me, you know, we might be better off than this mealy-mouthed. Again, I didn't hear this out of these guys, okay? But I have heard other pastors say, I don't know, man, maybe we'd be better off if we quit fooling around. And I usually say to them, well, I would like to have the revival without all the other stuff, because I've seen it, what it looks like, and it is not attractive, okay? And so I'm not saying that I'm wishing for that to occur. But guess what? It doesn't matter what I think. It matters what God thinks, and almost certainly judgment is coming. Although it may not turn out quite what you think, all right? I'm hoping for a revival. And if it takes that, it may indeed take that, okay? I personally believe that for the older of us in this room, it's not going to be a pleasant ride, because when you're old, it's kind of hard to kind of run, and I'm already creaking, and you know, so I'm thinking it may not be that great for us. Our grandkids, I'm hoping, I've got 6 of them now, and another one on the way, and I'm hoping for them they'll see revival. Because if they don't, it's not going to be happy for them either. All right, so why don't we, this thing usually generates questions, okay? And this is a little different setting than on Sunday morning, right? So, there's no, as I tell my students all the time, there's no stupid question, okay? And in fact, I prefer kind of off-the-wall things, you know, because then I can always turn it back to where it needs to go, you know. So, a question. You must have a question about pestilence or these genetic weird things. Those weird ambulances my kids are putting together.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When, who, why was it decided that everything in our life would be run by a circuit board?
No, yeah.
You know, our cars, our washers now, I mean, everything. So when something does happen, we don't be able to function.
Yeah. The question was, you know, why have we made this decision to be so dependent on technology? Some of it wasn't exactly decided on, it just kind of moved that direction, but I have heard others say that it's a way of controlling us. Okay, that there is some thinking that goes on with this. I think most of the people that want to make money, they can make money with technology, and it's easier to make money with technology. And so there's that going on. But guys like me and ladies that I work with, and we've been screaming and squawking that, you know, this is trouble, this is a mistake, this is a mistake, this is a mistake. Oh, you're just academics, you know, you college professor, you know, absent-minded professor, go back to your office. And we keep yelling and hollering, and I went to a meeting in Washington where they were talking about the cyber grid collapse. And there was a member of the Obama administration that got up there, and they were just about booed because they were the ones that were supposed to be getting the power grid so it won't fall apart. And just, I can't know any other way to put it than they hadn't done their job. Nothing had been done, despite having been given all this money. And this person, and these weren't like conservative people in the room, they were just, you know, functionaries like me. And boy, I don't know. Why didn't that guy do his job? Why isn't it being done now? I don't like conspiracy theories, I'll just tell you right off. I hear all of them because, you know, oh, you must know. I don't know. But that's a weird one. Why wouldn't they fix it? I don't have an answer for you. There's no reason. There are these big, the power companies have these giant, they're not generators, but they're switch boxes kind of like. And they come in and they cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. And if something happens to them, it takes 6 months to make one. They don't stockpile them. This guy, one of his jobs was to get a bunch of them and stockpile them, and he hadn't done it. And it's just stuff like that. And why aren't you doing your job? You know. But nobody squawks, but me and a handful of others. So I don't have an answer for you. I'd like to think that it's not somebody that wants us to fall and collapse, but I don't know why they're not doing their job, you know. I really don't. It's weird. I think some of it is that, you know, it's easier to make money, but you can fix a lot of this without spending a lot, but you'd have to get moving on it. It would take us a few years. We could turn it right around. And I don't know, you know, under this new administration, I haven't seen yet. I'm hoping under this crowd that maybe something will change. I don't know. But it is weird that we're very, very vulnerable and nothing's being done. And I mean nothing is being done about it. I don't know. I've shouted myself hoarse on it. And I'm told that I'm shouting too loud, but we'll keep on shouting. So, yes, sir.
Do you know anything about terrorist sleeper cells?
Sleeper cells. The answer is yes. There are sleeper cells in this country. There are, well, I'll do the Texas thing. So in Travis County, Texas, which is Austin, Texas, a little hippie town there, the capital of the state, they have every week about 20 to 30 people that change their name from an Arabic name to an Hispanic name. Because, you know, to us, Arabs and Hispanic people kind of look a lot alike. And so these people are coming across the border as Arabs and changing their names to Hispanic names. That's just one example. That's just one county near the border. That gives you an idea of what's going on. Now, are they tracking these guys? They are. Not far from here, not only 10-minute drive from my home, is a Wahhabist, Pakistani-run Muslim encampment. It's on the border between Franklin, Banks, and Madison County. Okay? And they picked it for that reason. There's 30 of them in the country. They're run by a Sheikh Abu Ghulani. If you want to look at pictures of it, you can go to the Christian Action Network online. And you'll see all sorts of pictures of them. This thing has a 3-story concrete mosque. And they have guys that meet you at the front, Mecca Road, Franklin County, and with AK-47 rifles.